Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Camilla, I'm a crochet designer, and today I want to speak to you about how you become a really good crocheter. And I think I know a little bit about that after doing hours and hours of crochet projects, crochet designs, multiple garments. You can check them out on my Instagram or here on YouTube. And I want to teach you how, with some small tricks and to avoid common mistakes that make it more difficult for you to crochet, make it more difficult for you to see your stitches, and also that can lead you to a common error, which is to get the wrong stitch count. We're gonna start with number 1, and that is the chain 1 or chain 2 or chain 3 at the beginning of the row or the round. So this is something that you're doing to get to the level of the rest of the stitches. For example, if you're working single crochet, you're gonna chain 1 in order to get up to the level of the other stitches. Usually this is not considered a stitch, but check the pattern to see if it's considered a stitch or not. Chain 2 can be made, for example, if you're making a half double crochet, a slightly taller stitch. And chain 3 can be made in order to make the first double crochet with US terms. And as I said, always check the pattern to see if the chains at the beginning are considered a stitch or not. If they are considered a stitch, this also decides where you're going to place your first stitch. And I can show you with some examples. Throughout this video, I'm going to post video illustrations of what I'm talking about to make it easier for you to follow. And if you like this video, please like or subscribe so that I can make more videos like this and help you become the best possible crocheter. I really love crochet and I hope that you do too, or maybe that you will. It's a great hobby that means that you will never be bored. There are unlimited possibilities for different stitch structures, different constructions. You can do objects, amigurumi, you can do garments, you can do home decor, you can do multicolor patterns, and there are a number of different ways you can do multicolor. There is mosaic crochet, there is basically unlimited techniques you can use. So we're gonna get into the techniques here now. I'm going to show you a video here of when I'm starting the row with a chain. And first of all, it's important to understand that this is a help for us to continue the row. It's usually not a stitch. And since it's not a stitch, you're going to work into the first stitch from the previous row because you haven't really made a stitch. But if the pattern says that this, for example, chain 3 is considered a stitch, the first double crochet of the row, then you're not going to make another double crochet in the absolute first stitch from the previous round. And this is something that can go wrong when you are making your first patterns. And sometimes patterns are not clear about that. I'm sure in the beginning I was also it's something you learn when you write patterns, what you have to be really clear about. So if it's the case that the pattern doesn't clearly state, you can also decide yourself what you have to do in order to get the right stitch count. It's not ideal, but you can do that. You can say that, what do I have to do in order to get the right amount of stitches? And as long as you keep doing the same thing every row or every 2 rows, your stitch count will remain the same. So that's that, the chains at the beginning of the row. And then the important thing is when you go back and forth and you come back to this place, the beginning of the row on each side where you made the chains, it's important not to confuse this chain for a stitch, given that we are not considering this chain a stitch. And here I come to my second point, which is going to make it easier for you to count your stitches, and that is not to, as I call it, kill your first stitch. And that can happen if you hold your yarn very tight, which is a common beginner's mistake. And when you make your chain or your first stitch, it simply just drowns in the rest of the material that you have made. So it's even more important at the beginning of the row to almost exaggerate and pull up your yarn. I can show you a bit of illustration here. Hold your tension and your yarn loosely so that it becomes clear for you on the next, when you come back to the same place, that here I have made a stitch. And to separate what is a chain, the starting chain that you make, and what is an actual stitch. This can be really tricky in the beginning. And even, you know, when you have crocheted multiple hundreds of hours, sometimes it's just unclear. And that's how it is with crochet. You're finishing your stitches on every row, which is different from knitting. In knitting, you're keeping your stitches live, which I know that some knitters or crocheters, some people find easier that the stitches are still live, while others find it easier that, as in crochet, you finish your stitches and you don't need to bother with, you know, losing stitches, for example, that they slide off your knitting needle. But that's just how it is for crochet. So if you want to crochet without problems, you want to make sure that your stitches are clear. And one thing you can do is to be extra careful in the beginning and end of the row to keep your tension loose. So that is a second point that I also want to make, that you want to keep your tension loose. And now I'm not saying keep your tension way too loose, making your work ugly. If you're a very loose crocheter, you maybe don't need to think about this. You don't need to make it too loose. But a common beginner's mistake is that you're very tense. You're trying to hold your thread in order not to lose it. You don't know exactly how to hold it. So your stitches become way too tight. And what you can do, I'm sure you've heard this advice before, but what you can do is to use a thick yarn, and you can also use a relatively large hook. There's a limit to that. If you take a way bigger hook than is recommended for your yarn, it's going to be difficult. The yarn is going to slide off the hook part, so you shouldn't exaggerate, as always. But definitely don't choose a lace weight yarn and a 1.5 millimeter hook for your first project. It's going to be very, very difficult. A good type of yarn, now it's a bit different with European terminology, US terminology, or wherever you are in the world, but I would say a DK weight is okay. An Aran weight is okay, worsted weight is okay, maybe bulky is not going to be the... It's also, I think bulky will work, but maybe it's a little bit too heavy to start off with. But somewhere there is going to be like the most comfortable for you to work. And hook sizes like 4 to 6 maybe is going to be a millimeter, and then I'm speaking millimeters. I don't have in my head what's the US equivalent, but 4 to 6 millimeters is probably going to be the most comfortable for you to use if you're a beginner. You're also going to want to count your stitches regularly, and as a knitter I found this a little bit annoying, or I was always wondering if it's really necessary, and it's not that you have to count your stitches every single row if you're doing a project, but especially as a beginner it's very helpful to understand what's happening when you're working. For example, if you're working in a way that increases your stitches every row, you have to find out quickly, because otherwise you're going to obviously have problems. Your work is going to expand and not be straight. So in the beginning, before you have learned exactly how to work in order to keep your stitch count the same, count your stitches for every row. And this is also useful in order to learn how you see what is a stitch or not. Also choose a simple stitch for your beginner project, such as single crochet, where it's quite easy to see your stitches. If you find that your stitch count is increasing or decreasing, you will have to try to figure out why this is happening. And one problem can be the beginning and the end of the row. As I said, you are mistaking the chain, beginning chain, or on either side for a stitch, and then you are working into that stitch. Another mistake can be that your stitches are way too tight, so you are just skipping some of the stitches on the next row because you simply don't see that there's a stitch there. So if that's your problem, if you find that you are really struggling to see where to put in your hook and you're struggling to actually get the hook into the stitches, go up a hook size and try to relax the yarn that you are working with. And this is sort of the key to almost everything, how you hold your yarn. And this obviously is not something you just learn immediately. It takes practice, but I promise you that once you get a hang of how to hold your yarn in a comfortable way, crocheting is gonna get a lot easier. So you just need that little bit of patience to figure out how to hold your yarn, and that's gonna make your stitches even. And once your stitches are even, it's gonna be easy to see where to place your hook, and it's gonna be easy not to skip stitches or make too many on one row. So as long as you are not doing something that is either increasing or decreasing your stitches on every row, it is okay at one point to have one stitch too many or one stitch too few. Because what you should realize is that crochet, as we said, we are finishing the stitches on every single row or round. So it is easy to happen that you miss one stitch somewhere at the end of the row, or and for example, when I'm doing ribbing, I really do need to count my stitches every single row because it's simply too confusing sometimes to see where your first and last stitch is. If you find on a bigger project that I have one stitch too many or too few, you can just make a decrease or an increase. And I think this is important, that we don't get stuck for one stitch and say, oh, you know, I'm just giving up on this project. I'm a terrible crocheter. I cannot do this. I think this is a wrong approach, because it's easy to happen to miss one stitch, and maybe you are thinking differently than the designer does, because there are so many things you have to define for crochet in order to crochet the exact same way. So I would say it's okay to have one stitch too many or one stitch too few if it's a one-time thing. So if that's the case, you can adjust by doing putting the needle into 2 stitches and then working it as one, and then you are making a decrease if you have one too many. Sometimes you can just skip one stitch if it doesn't make it look ugly. It's also an option. And if you have too few, you simply make 2 single crochet, for example, in one stitch. Obviously, if you notice that this is happening every row, you have to look into why this is happening, because it doesn't make sense to increase and decrease every row. Then it's better to fix the problem. But as I told you, if it's a one-time thing, just solve the problem and move on with your project so that you can finish it and have the joy from it. It's okay, you're not a bad crocheter. It's happens to everyone. So we have to be a little bit practical, but it's also very important to learn some basics that help you to make your crocheting easier and therefore also more enjoyable. I hope this helps you a little bit with that first project of yours, or second or 10th. And if you found this useful, please leave a comment. I'm really happy to see if I have helped someone. I spend a lot of my time doing crochet, so I'm happy to help others progress with their hobby as well. So I hope to see you again for another video very soon. Bye bye!